On Microsoft, what do we make of this news?
Well, I think more importantly than the layoffs, because they've been laying folks off, and this is what you would expect to do, especially as you're maybe getting better productivity from some of these applications. I think the pushing out the chip designs, right? And so we know that, again, like all of NVIDIA's major customers, which are meaning to be their major competitors at some point, the fact that they are doing that just tells you that the capabilities internally are probably not the sort of thing that investors who've been buying like stocks like Broadcom, would think, right? So some of those TAMs that we heard from Broadcom late last year and reiterated by Marvell, earlier this year, maybe they're not there for them, right? Maybe it is the sort of thing that NVIDIA continues just to dominate. But at the end of the day, I think about NVIDIA and I think about the customer concentration and, Microsoft's their biggest customer. And, NVIDIA is going to be competing with them in data centers, too. So it's becoming like a pretty eventually. I mean, but, it's all happening. So it seems like there's a little bit of a love triangle here. It all points to probably pretty decent news
I like that.
For NVIDIA, though. But then you say to yourself, Kovac just said it. $4 trillion in market cap. Who thought NVIDIA would be that one, right? And so it's kind of all happening there. I'd go a different direction because I think all of the AI news and the names that we know are getting a little exuberant. I'd start to look at some of these chip manufacturers. Like I would look at not TSM, but I'd say the suppliers of that would be an AMAT or something like that. Those guys are coming off the chip equipment providers. So I think you got to kind of go further afield at this point because I think those names are kind of full.
Doesn't this show you that it's much harder than you thought to compete in database chips? I mean, the bread and butter of NVIDIA, and then maybe NVIDIA's mode is actually pretty decent at this point, even though there are all these reports that Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're all making their own chips.
Yeah, well, it sounds like Amazon is well on their way to making chips that they use, but it also speaks to the demand for processing power, right? Mm-hmm. And so, with NVIDIA being right in the center, the picks and shovels, we talk about it all the time, it doesn't seem like the demand part, which would be the real thing that would make the stock turn, is changing at all for the worse. In fact, I think it's getting better.
Yeah, I think it does bode well for the supply chain, the infrastructure. So I like TSM for this and their advanced packaging capacity. And they talked about how that's actually gotten stronger over the last couple months. An ARM, I think some of these players are ones you want to hold here. And I do think that you could look at it from both sides and just say people are kind of slowing down on Microsoft. But I think Microsoft's got their hands full in a lot of places, in a lot of interesting places, and I think that's maybe just good news for everybody. I don't think this is a signal that there's less demand in terms of AI and in terms of chips and building up those reservoirs of capacity. But I do think this obviously does underscore NVIDIA's leadership. I think it's also proven that AMD has had a pretty good month, and there's a reason they've had a pretty good month because I think people underestimated where the 350 and the 400 chips have been. They've given some announcements in the last month that have been bullish. I like AMD.
Was this good news or bad news for Microsoft ultimately, Bonawyn?
I think it's more neutral.
Okay.
Frankly, I would have been more concerned had they essentially conceded that they were having these design issues and continue to push forward, spending money that you're not going to get an ROI on. I think that's where you would have seen probably a decline double of what we saw today. Like the rest of the group, I definitely think it's a positive for NVIDIA. Essentially, the complexity around the design and manufacturing process. We're going to hear about Intel later. Like clearly, that is something that probably wasn't yet priced into the stock. I know a lot of us were looking out to 26 numbers and saying, okay, that's probably where the extent of the visibility. I think this probably buys you another 12 to 18 months in terms of understanding that revenue level will probably remain where it is.